All right, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be looking at a very interesting day, November 27th, 2024. And we've got kind of a mix here of global news headlines and market reports. So quite a bit going on, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. It's incredible. You can take just a single day and you get such a fascinating snapshot of like the state of the world, almost like peeking behind the curtain to see all the events unfolding.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Mm.
our goal today is to help you, the listener, kind of cut through all the noise and really understand all the forces at play, both, in the markets and the geopolitical arena. We'll uncover the hidden connections, the surprising trends, and hopefully we'll have some aha moments along the way.
Looking forward to unraveling this with you.
All right, so let's just jump right in
Yeah.
with what seems like a familiar story. The U.S. stock market, the S&P 500 hit a record high, believe it or not, for the 52nd time this year. I mean, that sounds great on the surface, but it also
Breaks
raises
up.
some eyebrows, right?
Yeah, it does. Obviously on the surface it shows strong investor confidence, but you have to wonder, is there maybe a bit of a fear of missing out driving this? Is there maybe even a bubble forming? Because remember, what goes up must come down.
Okay, so potential bubble. That's an interesting way to start things off.
Yeah.
Now, tech, of course, seems to be driving a lot of this surge as usual. Microsoft, Salesforce, both posting solid gains. But here's where it gets a bit more interesting. Automakers like General Motors and Ford actually took a pretty big hit. General Motors actually plunging 9%. That seems kind of counterintuitive given the overall market optimism. No.
Yeah, and this is where I think we start to see the impact of, global trade tensions, both GM and Ford. They rely a lot on international manufacturing, particularly in those regions that are, being affected by tariffs. So they're feeling the pressure from both sides, higher import costs and, possible disruptions to their supply chains.
So it's like on the one hand, you have these tech giants like Amazon, who seem to be kind of insulated from these trade issues. In fact, they gained over 3%. But then you have these more traditional industries that are really bearing the brunt of all this uncertainty.
Yeah, it's almost like we're seeing two separate economies emerge, one thriving in this digital world and the other really struggling with these global trade barriers. And it makes you think, for you, the listener, how could this divergence impact, your own investment decisions or even your spending habits?
That's a great point. We tend to think of the market as this single entity, but maybe it's becoming more fragmented. So let's zoom out a bit and look at the global picture.
Okay, so from Asia, we're getting kind of mixed signals. Japan's market actually dipped, but then China and Hong Kong saw gains, which maybe suggests they're starting to decouple from those U.S. market trends. Europe also closed lower, adding to this sense of global uncertainty. And the dollar actually stabilized amidst all this, which might mean investors are starting to look for a safe haven.
So a lot of volatility, mixed signals. That definitely seems to be a theme so far.
Yeah.
But one thing that really caught my attention was the news about oil. Prices initially edged lower, which, isn't that surprising given all the market anxiety. But then we get this. OPEC Plus is in talks to delay their oil production restart, potentially for months. That's a pretty bold move.
It is, yeah. And it tells me that OPEC Plus is really prioritizing price stability over, those immediate production increases. They're probably concerned about oversupply and, the impact that could have on global energy prices, especially with winter coming up in the Northern Hemisphere.
So beyond just, prices at the pump, what could this mean for us?
Well, higher energy prices could have kind of a ripple effect, throughout the whole economy. It could fuel inflation, potentially impacting consumer spending across the board. It's a good reminder of how interconnected global markets really are. What happens, in one part of the world can have these really far-reaching consequences.
Okay, so buckle up, everybody, because this oil situation
Hmm.
could get interesting. Now, let's look at some of the economic signals coming from central banks. The Federal Reserve minutes seem to be signaling caution on any future rate cuts, which feels a bit different from the European Central Bank, where it seems they're anticipating further rate reductions.
Yeah, central banks are walking this really fine line right now, trying to balance inflation concerns with the need to, support economic growth. I think the Fed's cautious approach suggests they believe the U.S. economy is still relatively strong, but the ECB's willingness to consider further cuts might signal some concern about a sluggish Eurozone economy.
Okay, and then you have this interesting case of the Netherlands. They've always been known for, their fiscal discipline, sort of like the poster child for budget responsibility.
Yeah.
Yet they're accepting the EU's fiscal path, even though it goes against some of their traditional recommendations. What's going on there?
It's intriguing, for sure. It could be that they're prioritizing broader EU stability
Hmm.
over their own strict fiscal rules. Maybe it's a shift in their long-held economic philosophy. Or maybe it's just, a pragmatic response to the current economic climate in Europe. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out long term.
Yeah, like they're saying, we'll stick to the rules, but we also need to be flexible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's talk about some predictions. Everybody loves a little crystal ball gazing, right? Goldman Sachs is feeling pretty bullish on U.S. equities, not surprising given the record highs we've seen. But then you have Deutsche Bank forecasting the S&P 500 at a whopping 7,000 by the end of next year, while Bank of America is predicting slightly more modest, 6,656 by 2025. Those are some pretty bold predictions.
Yeah, they are. But it's important to remember that predictions are just that, predictions. They're educated guesses based on a whole bunch of factors. Economic growth, inflation, interest rates, and all these other things that are hard to predict. It's a bit like trying to, forecast the weather. There's always a chance of unexpected storms.
So for us non-economists out there, what should we take away from all this?
The key takeaway, I think, is that uncertainty is really the only certainty. These predictions give us a range of possible outcomes, but nobody knows for sure what the future holds. So instead of trying to predict the unpredictable, it's more useful to focus on building resilience and adaptability. Diversify your investments, stay informed, and just be prepared for the unexpected.
Sound advice, especially in times like these. All right, let's switch gears for a minute and look at some company-specific news. One story that really stood out to me was the Biden administration's proposal to cover obesity drugs. Under Medicare and Medicaid, this could be a major change for millions of Americans who struggle with obesity and for the pharmaceutical companies developing these treatments.
Absolutely. It could potentially reshape the healthcare landscape and really impact the pharmaceutical industry. If these drugs become more accessible, we could see a huge surge in demand.
Yeah.
And that could lead to higher healthcare spending overall.
Yeah, and we're already seeing the market react to this, right? Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, both big names in the obesity drug space, saw their stocks jump after this announcement. It's like investors are betting on a future where these treatments become much more mainstream.
That's exactly right. They're anticipating, potentially huge profits if these drugs are more widely covered by insurance. And on the other side of that, Amgen actually saw their stock drop because their obesity drug trial results didn't really meet investor expectations. It shows you, in the pharmaceutical world, success really hinges on clinical data and how effective people perceive these new treatments to be.
Yeah, high stakes with real-world implications. Speaking of high stakes, Dell and HP reporting mixed results,
Yeah.
which maybe suggests a slowdown. And the PC market recovery. Remember that big surge in demand during the pandemic? Looks like that momentum might be starting to fade.
Yeah, it's a trend worth watching. It could signal a broader slowdown in tech spending overall. The pandemic forced everybody to invest a lot in tech, to adapt to remote work and online learning. And now, as things return to normal, that crazy tech spending might be easing up a bit.
A potential reality check for the tech sector. And speaking of tech, Apple is running into some interesting challenges in China with their AI models. Seems like they might need to partner with local companies to get approval, which could really change their plans.
Yeah, that regulatory environment in China for foreign tech companies is getting more and more complex. It shows you the challenges of navigating those rules and maybe the need for strategic partnerships to gain a foothold in that huge market.
It's like a constant game of adaptation, right? Trying to stay ahead of the regulatory curve. Now, before we move on to the geopolitical stuff, I want to go back to a story that really piqued my interest. It's about Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba and his, shall we say, surprising investment skills.
Yes, this is where things get really interesting. We often think of political leaders in terms of their policies or their public image, but here we have a prime minister who's quietly built this very impressive investment portfolio, outperforming, even Japan's benchmark index and some of his own cabinet members.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. What does this unexpected revelation tell us about him as a leader? And, should we be worried about potential conflicts of interest?
These are excellent questions, and we'll definitely dig into those in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, it's a good reminder that there's often more to the story than meets the eye, even in a world dominated by headlines and breaking news. It's those hidden details, those unexpected subplots that can give us the most insightful glimpses into the forces that are really shaping our world. It certainly does make you think about what it means to be a leader. But before we get back to PM Ishiba and his investing talent, there are a few more company-specific things that caught my eye. Intel getting almost $8 billion in federal grants is huge for them, and it's an interesting example of the government getting involved in the tech world.
That's a ton of money. I remember the whole global chip shortage thing a while back. Is this connected to that at all?
It definitely is. It's part of this bigger plan by the Biden administration to boost chip making here in the U.S. and rely less on other countries. It's about national security, and staying competitive and making sure we don't have those supply chain problems like we did during the pandemic.
So it's a pretty strategic move with economic and geopolitical implications.
Hmm.
While Intel is celebrating, though, another pharmaceutical giant, Roche, hit a bit of a snag. One of their lung cancer drug trials didn't go as planned. Shows you that innovation isn't always smooth sailing, huh?
Oh, absolutely. Developing new drugs is a long and tough process, with exciting breakthroughs and disappointing setbacks along the way. This just highlights how risky it is to bring new treatments to market. It's a blow for Roche, no doubt, but it also gives them valuable data to learn from for future research.
It reminds us that even the most promising scientific efforts face challenges.
Hmm.
Speaking of challenges, ArcelorMittal, the steel giant, is actually putting the brakes on their green steel-making investments in Europe. This seems a little odd given all the focus on sustainability and going green.
It does seem like a step backward on the surface, but I think it shows just how complicated it is to actually transition to a more sustainable future. ArcelorMittal says they're doing this because they're not getting enough policy support from the EU. They're basically saying that right now the economic incentives aren't strong enough to make these investments worthwhile.
So we need greener tech to fight climate change, but the financial risks might make companies hesitate without more government support.
Exactly. This is why governments and industries need to work together to make green innovation more appealing. We need clearer policies, financial incentives, and maybe even things like carbon pricing to make these technologies more attractive and speed up the transition.
It's a tough problem, but this just emphasizes how important it is to find solutions.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears now. From the economic landscape to the geopolitical scene. Let's talk about the U.S. brokered ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. Seems like good news, a step towards peace. But the source material mentions something pretty unsettling. Heavy Israeli strikes on Beirut right before the ceasefire.
Yeah, that part is definitely worrying. Makes you question the whole thing, right? Was this Israel's way of getting an advantage before agreeing to the ceasefire? Or is it just a sign of how much distrust and animosity still exists?
It's a reminder that even when we see progress, tensions can still erupt into violence. Let's turn our attention to the U.S. political scene now, where President-elect Donald Trump is already making headlines with his appointments. Kevin Hassett for the National Economic Council, Jamieson Greer as the U.S. Trade Representative, and Tom Homan for Border Security. These picks are shaking things up, both in Washington and beyond.
These appointments definitely give us some clues about what the Trump administration might be like. Hassett is known for his supply-side economic ideas, so we might see a focus on tax cuts and getting rid of regulations to boost the economy. Greer's role as trade representative could mean a more protectionist approach to trade, maybe even reigniting those trade conflicts with places like China and Mexico. And with Homan, known for his strong views on immigration, we could see a continuation of some of Trump's more controversial immigration policies.
So possibly some big changes in U.S. economic and foreign policy, changes that could affect the whole world. And speaking of global impacts, the source material mentions the Mexican president hinting at retaliation against Trump's tariff plans. Sounds like those trade war drums are beating again.
Protectionist policies like tariffs often backfire, They disrupt global supply chains, make things more expensive for consumers, and lead to retaliation, which hurts everyone in the end. A trade war between the U.S. and Mexico is definitely a concern. It could really destabilize the global economy.
It's a delicate balance, and one misstep could send everything into a spiral. While that's brewing across the Atlantic, France is dealing with its own political turmoil. Prime Minister Michel Barnier's budget proposals are getting a lot of pushback, and there's even talk of a no-confidence vote.
Yeah, the situation in France just shows how much uncertainty and instability there is everywhere right now. Barnier's budget plans probably reflect the tough economic situation in many European countries, but the backlash shows how difficult it is to implement austerity measures when people are already struggling.
Even in established democracies, Economic trouble can cause political instability and social divisions. And while France deals with its internal issues, an investigation into corruption involving China's defense minister is making waves in Beijing.
That investigation is a big deal, especially considering China's growing military power and its more assertive role globally. It raises questions about transparency, accountability, and whether there might be power struggles within the Chinese government.
Reminds us that even powerful countries like China have their own internal challenges and political intrigue. All right, let's get back to our enigmatic Japanese PM, Shigeru Ishiba, and his impressive investment track record. It's strange contrast, the world facing economic uncertainty, political turmoil, potential trade wars, and here's this leader quietly beating the market.
It's intriguing, isn't it? Does his success with investments show a strategic mind, an ability to analyze risks and make smart choices? Or does it make us wonder about potential conflicts of interest, maybe using information that others don't have access to?
Yeah, it's a real head scratcher, isn't it? A prime minister who's a secret investing whiz, a world teetering on the edge of multiple crises. The plot thickens. But let's try to unpack this a bit. We were just talking about PM Ishiba and his amazing investment performance. What are your thoughts on this, and how does it maybe change our view of him as a leader?
Well, it's a bit of a puzzle, right? On the one hand, you could argue that his financial smarts are a good thing. It might show that he thinks strategically, that he can look at data and assess risk, make smart decisions. And those are all qualities that, could be pretty useful when you're dealing with the complexities of global politics and economics.
I see what you mean. Like, if he can manage his own money so well, maybe those same skills apply to, managing a whole country's finances. But it's not quite that simple, right?
No, not really. There's the flip side, potential conflicts of interest. Is he maybe using his position to get an edge in the market? Does he have access to information that the public doesn't? Those are questions that, journalists, his opponents, even regular people are going to be asking.
Transparency and accountability are super important when you're talking about someone with that much power.
Yeah.
It's almost like we need another deep dive just into PM Ishiba's stock portfolio. But for now, let's step back and look at the bigger picture. We've covered so much today, from record stock markets and rumblings of trade wars to the challenges of green tech and this prime minister's surprising financial talent. It's been quite a ride.
It really has. And I think it just goes to show how everything is connected. Global markets, politics, individual companies, even individual leaders, they're all tangled up together in this web of cause and effect. Something happens on one side of the world, and it can have a ripple effect, impacting things you'd never think were related.
It's a lot to take in, honestly. Makes you realize just how much is going on behind the scenes, even on a seemingly ordinary day like November 27th, 2024. So what does this mean for the average person trying to make sense of it all? How can we navigate this complex world and make smarter choices, not just about our money, but about our lives in general?
Well, I think the first step is a change in how we think. We have to accept that change is constant and uncertainty is just part of the deal now. The old ways of doing things don't always work anymore, and the future is, well, it's impossible to predict with certainty. Instead of clinging to, outdated ideas or trying to guess what's going to happen, we need to be more adaptable, more resilient, more willing to learn and adjust as we go.
That sounds kind of like the advice you'd give a startup company trying to survive in a constantly changing market. Be agile, be innovative, be ready to change direction when you need to. It's almost like we all need to be entrepreneurs in our own lives, always on the lookout for opportunities and challenges and adjusting our strategies accordingly.
That's a great analogy. We need to be proactive, not reactive. We need to be critical thinkers, always questioning assumptions and seeking out, different perspectives, and maybe taking a page from PM Ishiba's book. We should all try to become more financially literate, understand how global events impact our wallets, and make informed choices about our own investments.
It's a call to action.
Yeah.
Right. Don't just sit back and watch the world change around you. Get involved, stay informed, and feel empowered to make decisions that align with your values and your goals.
Absolutely. I think that's a great way to put it. We've definitely given our listeners a lot to think about today.
We have. Anything else you'd like to leave our audience with before we wrap up?
Just this. Don't let the complexity of it all overwhelm you. Instead, be curious, be informed, and most importantly, be an active participant in shaping the kind of future you want to see.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final question to ponder. In a world that's constantly changing, what steps can you take today to become more adaptable, more resilient, and more prepared for whatever the future holds. Think about it, explore the ideas we've discussed, and come to your own conclusions. Till next time, keep diving deep.